Okay, we're not too late. We're not too late. Right on time. Always right on time. Boom, boom. Okay, good enough. Thank you. Okay. So take a moment just to sit. So close your eyes for a moment. Let yourself just take a transition here. As my teacher likes to say, give yourself a little space, between the end of one thing and the beginning of another. Life is really lived in the space between things, and so often we just rush over that to the next thing. We're so exhausted, we just fall into unconsciousness when we sleep. We don't mindfully fall into sleep, and then as soon as we're up, we're just off to the next thing we need to do. So give yourself a little permission here to create some space, a little buffer between the end of what you were just doing and entering in this room. Now that you've created that space, that little opening, take a moment to reflect on why you came here. Again, if you're here for the first time, maybe it's something off the beaten path, so maybe it's very fresh in your mind, but try to find the deeper reason that you came. What's behind the impulse that brought you here tonight? What got you interested? Again, and without judgment. There's no such thing as a good reason, a bad reason, just to get at the heart of what the reason is. And then for those of us who kind of come regularly, to kind of reflect again and what that intention is, bringing it anew, making it fresh. So again, it's not something that we're just here by habit or mindless routine. And again, this is kind of an analytical meditation, so have a little focus to your musing on this. Really try to form with clarity what that intention is. Maybe if it's not a word, it can be a very poignant feeling or a very visceral intention. But again, try to bring that intention into relief, whatever it is. Again, the more you make that intention clear for you, the more whatever you do here tonight can work for you to that end. So again, make that your motivation for making your intention clear. And then let that intention, fully formed, now become kind of your filter, your lens through which you take in this class. Again, it's maybe not always in the forefront of your conscious mind, but it's the pain through which you filter all the information that comes in. The more that you have the discernment of that intention, the more you can make use of what you hear tonight, what you experience. And then we bring in our wisdom, recognizing that the quality of what we get is only in relation to the quality of our listening and our intent. And then you can slowly deepen your breath, run your thumbs over your finger pads if it helps you bring awareness back to your body, and slowly open your eyes. Hi. Okay. So what's your name again? Gabriella. So it's going to be a little off the deep end. But, okay, good. But don't, best with these things, I mean, best for all of us, not just newcomers. Hi, Heather. Is, it's not so important that you get it. Look, because half the time you think you get it, you're not getting it anyway. So, but that's what I found for me at least. So getting it is just not that big of a deal. Just, let it wash over you. Let it just kind of seep in. What sticks, and what doesn't, you don't need anyway. That's how it works. So you don't have to be in a process of, understanding everything perfectly, because I don't understand half the stuff I'm saying anyway. It's just, we're just having fun. So yeah, just let it kind of implant on you a bit, and then this is the whole Buddhist idea of seeds. Something you hear at one point has relevance a lot later. Yeah. So let's start with a little review. So what are the three attributes that we've been talking about over and over? Just to contextualize. So we're in the third turning, and they make fine distinctions between these three attributes. So what are those three? Debbie's madly racing through her notes. Valiant. As soon as I say it, you'll remember it. You could say it's about context. Say again? So basically, in the first turning, remember, we talked about how Buddha said that nothing exists by definition, right? And in the second turning, he's all like, well, sorry, the first turning says everything exists by definition. In the second turning, he said nothing exists by definition. And then the third turning, which is why it's called fine distinctions, he's clarifying, okay, well, some things do exist by definition and some things don't, right? And the way he really broke it down is in these three attributes, right? So yeah, there you go. Construct is one. It's one of the three mental constructs. Appearance? Gabriella? No.
Changing.
Yeah, changing things, that's another. What's the third? Kind of. Heather knows. Ultimate, good. Yeah, ultimate reality. So it's a really simple idea. It's that there are things out there in the world. Those are changing things, right? And then you have certain ideas about those things, right? Some of those ideas are true. Some of them are completely false. For example, you see somebody as an awful person, right? They did a few things, you didn't like it. That's all true. But then you slap on that person, you have this idea they're an awful person from their own side. And then they have no ability to change no matter what they do. Even when they're nice to their kid or when their wife loves them, well, they're still an awful person. They just don't see it at the moment, right? So this is where, in this training, we talk about our suffering comes from, is we have these ideas about things that we think are real in the objects themselves. Now, again, this is an important thing. You're not wrong. It's valid. It's actually, when somebody hits you and you say that was unkind, you're completely legitimate in saying that. The problem is not in applying ideas to things. The problem is that you think that that's stuck in the things themselves and there's nothing you can do about it, right? A very simple way of saying it is that you don't think that you could feel better if you changed your ideas about things. You don't think if you reinterpreted something another way, you don't think that that would change anything. So another way of saying it is like, well, and this is what I come against. So think, well, I could reinterpret, like a classic one in Buddhism is somebody steals money from you. This has happened to Brandon, right? Brandon and Michelle. That's why Brandon's not here. So, somebody broke into her, in this school, somebody broke into his car, took a purse, and left, right? So you can validly put on that, this person stole something from me, right? However, that's the construct. You're taking these series of events, these things that happen, and you're saying, they stole from me. Perfectly fair. You're entitled to that if you want it. However, it's equally valid that you could say, I gave away my money after the fact. It was a post facto act of generosity, right? Now the problem is, that's not how I would feel. If I tried to do that in that situation, I'd say, well, I can try to see it that way, but who am I kidding? I actually was stolen from, and I'm trying to reinterpret it as something positive, and it's just a bunch of positive, mumbo jumbo, right? But what this school is getting us at is like, yes, those series of events happened, but you're able to the construct of you were stolen from is not existed it doesn't exist in the events. Your reinterpretation of it changes what it actually was, because stealing didn't happen in those events. Stealing is coming from your interpretation of it, right? And then the other schools obviously get a lot deeper than that, but this you can see why this is an accessible school, right? Because we can all kind of get behind the idea stealing is a construct. You're not going to go out in the world and find stealing. You'll find, somebody picked up an object and left. That's what happened. We can get behind that, right? You're not going to find stealing. Can you? Maybe I'm wrong.
But giving away something is a construct too.
Sure. Well, the idea is not to get rid of constructs. It's just to choose better ones.
But couldn't you? I don't know why anyone would do this because it doesn't create any good. But you could do the same thing. You could give away something and then just say someone stole it.
Sure.
I don't know why you would do that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Because I talk about this in the text, because they're like, when we talk. This is karma, right? Like one way you can talk about karma in this school is you build up different mental habits so that you interpret things in a positive light, and then that becomes real for you. Hello, right? So they say, for example, how do you define a bad thing in Buddhism? A bad thing is defined, this is kind of different from, I think, our normal Judeo-Christian view of things, but something is bad when it hurts you in the long run, right?
In Buddhism?
That's what it means for it to be bad, because the whole idea of karma, I mean, you're
What if it hurt someone else? I mean, that would be bad.
hurting somebody else does hurt you in the long run. That's the idea.
But if, okay, point, yeah.
So if I mean, they're interdependent, right? I mean, you can't, also hurting yourself is going to hurt somebody else. I mean, well, that's a whole of it. That's a rabbit hole. But, so the idea is that, right, so if you like suffering, by all means, like, it's not, if you like having things stolen from you, then by all means, steal stuff. You know what I mean? It's not bad then. But the thing is, the common denominator is I don't think we're united as humans and that we don't like our possessions taken from us, unwillfully, right? So it's not like it's bad in and of itself. It's bad in reference to what's going to cause you suffering, right? Okay, so that's changing things and constructs, right? Now, the last one, ultimate reality, is just the fact, it's kind of almost like an extra booster in a way. It's just saying that the fact that these changing things are absent of these constructs by nature, right? That's a technical way of saying it, but it's just another way of saying is that stealing doesn't exist. It's the absence of stealing existing inherently in the objects or the actions out there, right? And that's an important one because it gives you power. If that didn't exist, then I couldn't reinterpret things and have them be true. I'd always be wrong, right? If stealing wasn't absent in the actions, then me calling it something else would either be true or false. Does that make sense? So the fact that changing things are not inherently these constructs that we put on them, that's what allows for the possibility of reinterpretation. If that was absent, then you can reinterpret all you want, but you're just fooling yourself, right? And this is an important thing to get behind because we can kind of get this like, well, the idea is coming from me, but we're still convinced, well, if I might be trying to see it a different, this is at least me, I don't know how you are, but I get really aggravated by this idea of reinterpretation because essentially I think I'm fooling myself. I think I'm just making something up, right? It's this idea of emptiness that lets you say, well, no, you have several different interpretations that can be valid. It's just which one do you want, right? Which one's going to be the most helpful? Yeah? Okay, cool. So that's the three attributes. So what are the three attributes again? Construct. Changing things. Yeah, and then ultimate reality. And what is ultimate reality specifically? Yeah? But emptiness. But what is it in relationship to changing things and constructs? Emptiness of which? It's emptiness of the construct applying to the changing thing, inherently. Inherently. Right? You won't find stealing inherent in the actions that you're applying onto the event that you call stealing. Does that make sense? Yeah. You can validly label it as stealing, but that doesn't mean when you go look for stealing in the actions, it's going to be there, right? Like this is the thing. So I said, oh, they stole from me. Okay, what happened? Well, if stealing really exists out there, I should find it in the series of events, right? So, I'll do it from Brandon's point of view because it just happened, so this is great. So, somebody stole from me. Okay, what happened? Well, we were on a hike. We came back, the window was broken, the purse was gone, and those are all, so again, over those group of things, you can call that stealing, right? But you can't find stealing in any one of those events, right? Nor, and this is now you're going to Prasankika, nor can you find it in the group of the events without the label of stealing already being on there, but that's a whole other thing, right? And just for Brandon, he was very Buddhist about the whole thing. Same thing with Shell. He wasn't like, they stole from me. Like, he was very like, this is what's happening now. So I don't want to misrepresent. Wow. Yeah, no, I was like, wow, you should be teaching.
So the construct is stealing. The ultimate reality is they
Yeah.
And the changing thing is labeled as what? What would that be labeled?
No, the changing thing is the series of events.
Oh, so then the ultimate reality would
It's just that stealing doesn't exist inherently in
okay.
those events.
Okay, so when you take away the construct from that, that's the ultimate.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, right? Okay. Okay, so this is going to be a lot about, we got to do 2 classes today. We don't have to do anything, but we're going to try to do 2 classes today, so let's see how it goes. So this is a big idea in all Buddhist schools, this idea of concocting. There's a Tibetan word for it. So here's the hopeful thing that Buddhism presents, but it's also the most insulting, because this idea of concocting is contrasted to misperception. So what do I mean? I'll give a story in a second from this weekend, but concocting just means you're making something up that's not there, never been there, never will be there, never has been there, completely false. Right? Misperception is like, well, you're seeing something, but you're seeing it like the wrong way, or you're seeing it distorted. Right? The thing about Buddhism is that they're saying the reason you suffer is not, it's more severe than just a misperception. It's that you're making something up entirely that's not even there at all. Right? I mean, that gives you a lot of hope, because essentially, you know, you're upset about things that aren't even there. But it also is a big insult to your ego, because, you know, we're all basically like little children afraid of boogeymen anytime that we're upset about anything. I mean, at least for me, I'm like, no, my problems are real. Like, shit went down. If you were in my shoes and like, you know, but a Buddhist says, no, you're just making shit up. Like, everything is making shit up. Like, you know, anytime where you see somebody being hysterical and they're just like, you know, like, they hate me and yada, 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 and, you know, this person thinks this about me, and you're just like, what? What are you talking about? That's not true at all. You completely made that up. That's you every single time you're not happy about something. Every single time. When you have a moment of discomfort, it's that. You know? And this is also part of the idea of it, because then why do we suffer if it's an illusion? It's because this is this whole idea of grasping. We grasp onto our suffering through habituation. We think that, I mean, we're terrified to let go of our suffering. You know, the illusion is self-created and willfully held onto on some level. It doesn't feel that way. But actually, deep down, that's the only thing maintaining it. And I don't want to get into blame. This is not about, you know, you should feel guilty, you know, oh, I'm so bad because I make myself suffer. It's not that. It's just what it's supposed to inspire is that, you know, suffering can be dropped theoretically, could be dropped at any time. There's no inherent condition that needs to be dropped. Yes, Angela?
So, because I've been dealing with this too, like whenever I do recognize that I'm doing that, it's like it doesn't, just because I recognize it doesn't automatically mean the very next second I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
So how do I?
Because, well, this gets into direct perception of emptiness, but it's not the intellectual experience that's gonna convince you of it. Like, this is very different from like me talking to you about skydiving and then dropping you out of an airplane. Right?
So how would I
Do the
out of the airplane?
This is what these classes are for. I mean, this is why this is a whole thing. I mean, this is why, look, I mean, I'll be real with you. From a traditional Buddhist standpoint, right? You know, Arya Nagarjuna talks about this. There's stuff in, I think, kind of, I don't mean this pejoratively, because this stuff is really important and helpful, but like self-help Buddhism, which is beautiful and really helpful and beneficial for a lot of people. But basically Buddhism that's like, how can I use Buddhist ideas to improve my daily life, which is a great thing. But that, from kind of a traditional Buddhist standpoint, that's only a stepping stone. Because those are kind of like putting Band-Aids on the cracking dam. You know what I mean? It might have a momentary help. Like sidebar, Geshe Michael talked about this. He was a monk, and he was having this problem. You know, he had all this he was still having these intense feelings for attraction to women, even though he was a monk. It's not like that goes away just because you become a monk, right? And he was saying, well, his teachers would tell him, there's this one meditation you do where you look at the parts of things. You recognize that what you're applying your mind onto is just a collection of parts. So it's like, well, think about a woman's body. If you just think about the parts of it, and then you think about what's really happening inside with the guts and the organs, and there's this whole meditation about why are you so attracted to this thing that's only on the top, millimeter of skin? And then as soon as I open that up a bit, it becomes disgusting, right? This whole meditation on that. And he was like, still looks pretty good to me. And they say that in the text. It's like you can do these things as kind of like a, moment-to-moment remedy. But at the end of the day, it's like you have grasping in your mind. Our mind is in the constant habit of saying, you associate, it's bad association. You associate the feelings you have internally with the things out there in the world. And you're convinced that what you're feeling inside is the product of things out there. And until you get rid of that, you can try tricks, but it's latent in you. It's always going to come back, right? So that's why they talk about, look, these things are all stepping stones to seeing emptiness directly, which is this experience where you actually see directly that these qualities are not inherent in these phenomena. I mean, and it goes much deeper than that. But you're actually convinced, right? And, that's a very high level of attainment.
So jumping out of the airplane.
Jumping out of the airplane. Meditation is putting on the parachute and jumping off of a 2-foot thing into a pad. You know what I mean? It's just a little bit of practice. And then to actually jump out of there, you have to, and then maybe you go 5 feet and jump, and then you go 6 feet and jump. But it's literally the same, and then you're working all the way up to an airplane. You know what I mean? It's a long trajectory. Now, here's the thing. I know that can make you despondent, but here's the thing. If you're in a class, if you want, I'm being all traditional right now too. If you look at a traditional Buddhist point of view, if you're hearing this stuff now, this is not the first time you've heard it, right? You're working with infinite, past lives, right? So, they say it takes 3 times 10 to the 60th eons from a, sutra point of view to become a Buddha, okay? You've had infinite past lives. So who knows if you haven't done that times 2. This could very easily be the life. It's not like from this point it's going to take that long. You don't know how long you've been working. Yeah? Chances are if you're hearing this material, it's not the first time. Yeah? I'm not trying to convince you of past or future lives. All I'm saying is, if you want to get traditionalist about how long it's going to take, you can also be traditionalist about how long you might have been doing it without knowing. Yeah? Cool? Okay, so concocting. So we're all suffering because we're stupid and we make things up. That's the gist of it. So I'll give you an example. So I did this, Angela was there, which was awesome for her to come. I did this dance battle this weekend. So I'm a street dancer, and I used to battle a lot in New York, and I decided to enter this battle in LA with a friend, and I hadn't battled in a long time. And battles are, for me, they just bring up all this ego stuff. Because it's so, the thing is so aggressive. It's all about dominance. It's a wonderful culture, don't get me wrong, but it's also competitive. It's a competitive environment, and you're trying to dominate the other person, and they're trying to show you up. And so, I was in this battle, and we got to like, top 8, and then we lost to these guys who I just, I thought they were whack. I thought they were awful, right? I thought they were beneath me, right? I mean, already you're setting yourself up for demise when you start thinking like that. But so I was really, shook their hand. And, good job. I hate you so much. No, I don't. I love everybody. I'm a Buddhist. No, but I hate you. I really hate you. Smirk. So this is what I'm going through. So I'm going through this, right? And I was thinking about this, and
He did awesome, by the way.
well, no, I sucked. But anyway, this is. So I realized that this is the whole thing of concocting, by the way, right? So what I realized, what it was essentially about, was my desire to be a good dancer. Like, am I good? Am I a good dancer? Am I really talented? Did I impress people? Right? Am I a good dancer? That's what it came down. Like, well, it wasn't really about him. It was just losing to them invalidated my goodness as a dancer. That's what I was upset about, right? And so the way I tried to go about solving this problem is asking a lot of people, well, am I a good dancer or not? Like, how do you think I did? And we're asking my wife over and over and over again, am I a good dancer, right? Not believing her when she said yes, and then being angry, she told me that there's things I could work on, right? It's a losing battle. So that would be a misperception, right? This is how we normally go about things, is like, well, am I good or am I not good? I'm misperceiving it. Maybe I'm trying to work out the misperception. It's either a question of I'm good, and I just felt bad in the moment, so I'm having a misperception about being bad. That's what I'm hoping. Or it's that I really actually am bad, and I have all this misperception about thinking that I'm good, and I just have to confront that I'm bad. This is misperception, right? There's something about my qualities of a dancer that's there, right, one way or the other, and I'm just not getting clear on what that is. Does it make sense? Right? I'm thinking there is some inherent quality of my ability as a dancer, and I just need to figure out if that thing is good or bad or not. Right? We're all on board? Maybe you're all enlightened and you don't do this. I do this all the time, right? I try to figure it out.
Can you figure out if it's good or bad?
By asking a lot of people.
They're just saying what they see.
You see, yes, Prasangika, we're getting to that. No, but it's good. Yeah. Right, so here's what Peter's pointing to. The concocting is thinking there's such thing as a good dancer in the first place. See, that's why I suffered over it. It's because I really think there is this inherent thing that I either am or I am not. Right?
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I hear these teachings, I always hear, like through the back door,
Mm-hmm.
from this holiness or something, that there is a conventional good dancer and
Mm-hmm.
bad dancer.
Sure. But this is the thing that we get tripped up on, because if we could really see it as conventional reality, we wouldn't get upset about it. Because if I really understood that there was a conventionally good dancer, I'd realize it comes from how I'm in the habit of seeing things. Right? This is where we get into karma. If I'm in the habit of praising other people as dancers, I'm going to apply that same tendency to myself, and I'm going to see myself as a good dancer. But that's not what I'm upset about. I want to know how good of a dancer I am independently of other people thinking about it, or independently of how I see it. I want to know, how is it really? See, anytime we get into this thing about how is it really, this is when we're caught up in self-existence, right? So I propose, yeah, sure. If there is such thing as a conventionally good dancer or a bad dancer, but if I was really understanding that that was just a convention, it wouldn't bother me either way if I was good or if I was bad. It wouldn't matter. Because it's just, oh, this is just what I've done in the past. It doesn't say anything about me. It doesn't say anything about ability. It doesn't say anything about anything. And actually, it's just a flowering of past habits. Right? But because I think the qualities are actually inherent in my performance or my ability, and I latch onto that as me, that's where the suffering happens. Is that?
Well, I mean, conventional reality is what we confront every day
Mm-hmm.
in everything. And, you know, knowing what's back of that, what really is back of that, it's sort of, it's behind the screen of conventional reality all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, it's like everything. It's like, you know, we're conditioned to, I mean, I don't see the problem here. You know, I just think it's pretty plain. If once you accept the idea that what you see is not the way things are, then it applies to everything.
Of course, yeah. But, I mean, yeah, and maybe you're in our heart. I mean, but you know, we're all going to suffer differently about different things. I think the hard thing is in the midst of suffering to really accept that we're not. See, that's the hard thing, is that it's easy to say, not easy, but I'm saying I, at least in my experience, can get behind how that's true in things that are kind of everyday. But it's harder for me when I'm really suffering about something to say that I'm only suffering because I'm not seeing this as conventional reality. That's the idea. When you see it, if you're really seeing everything as conventional, this is what Buddhism proposes. If you're really seeing conventional reality as conventional reality all the time, you will never suffer. Likewise, anytime you're suffering, you're confusing conventional and ultimate reality. You're taking something as ultimate that's actually conventional. So I think, that's where the rub is, because, I mean, if you look at it, suffering is defined by being convinced that it's not conventional. I mean, that's the whole idea. Whoops. So, yeah, I think in that sense it's really experiential, because, I mean, I'll tell you, like this, I've been doing all this Buddhist stuff, and I'm like, oh, I totally understand, you know, nature of reality is everything's beautiful, and what? I lost? You know, I mean, all out the window, just finger snap, right? So, you know, but that's where the rubber meets the road, you know. That's where the understanding is. And this is why we can talk about, for example, intellectual understanding is so different than experiential, you know.
But doesn't it seem like the more these things happen to you and more you realize that these things aren't real,
Mm-hmm.
you know, your conceptions,
Mm-hmm.
the quicker you realize it, the less suffering you're doing all the time?
Yeah.
It seems like I catch myself quicker now and I don't suffer, I guess, as long as I used to.
Yeah, sure.
So isn't it just going to keep getting shorter and shorter? Or you just get closer to maybe having it forever?
I think that's one way to talk about it, is that, yeah, I think, you know, especially from a Gaelic point of view, that's why they call Lam Rim. This is steps on the path. It's a graduated steps to enlightenment. And I think you're right. You can talk about it in terms of karma. The more and more you do that, you're building the karma to have the direct perception of emptiness, right? But I think another way you could talk about it is, until you have that experience, you always have the seed to slip. Like, it's always, like, this is why they talk about the direct perception of emptiness as like a cessation, where it's like you can't fall back from it. Because up until that point, you always have the fuck up seed, where it's like something could just not go. I mean, it could just be something, and then boom, you're back to square one. So you're right. It's not like black and white, but there's a turning point in which it's just like you can't regress. Yeah.
What makes, okay, this might sound stupid,
Mm-hmm.
but like, what decides which moments that you're gonna slip up on? Because if there's no past and there's no you, then
Well, there is a past and there's a you. I didn't say there was no past and no
I
you.
know, but I mean, like, in terms of like Buddhism, like, if
If it
Why
doesn't
is it
mean.
that moment, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, this is a complicated question. I mean, this is like the subtle workings of karma, which I think you can't, they say you can't work out logically. First point is, and we'll get into the two extremes, but just because it's not ultimately real doesn't mean it's not real, right? So it's not, it's real. You go in front of the bus, it'll cream you. You know what I mean? This is what they talk about. But it just doesn't exist in the way you think, right? So, you know, this is what Peter is pointing to, too. It's like conventional world operates. You know, why karmic, you know, I mean, yeah, that's a very difficult question. I think it can go back to what we were talking about last week, is that you can say from any present moment, you know, you can look at a present moment and see why it flowered when it flowered. You know, you had a seed for something and the conditions came and boom, they met. It's like, you know, you had a seed for a weed and it's been dry for 10 years and all of a sudden you get a spout of rain and that weed comes up. So you can look at it kind of like as an explanatory way. But to say know when which karma is going to, I mean, even a Buddha can't know that, they say, because it's like, it's an open system. There's always more variables. You know, even a Buddha can make a prediction and your karma changes and things go in a different direction. So to know forward-looking, I think only a Buddha could even begin to kind of entertain. Okay. So let's script the three worldviews. So let's go into the two extremes. So this kind of segues nicely into two extremes. So have you guys heard these terms, eternalism and nihilism? Right? Every school has this idea of two extremes that we're trying to balance. Right? It's kind of like every school has their idea of emptiness, or in the lower schools you say selflessness, and they say if you take it to one extreme, you have this one false idea. If you take it to another extreme, you have an equally false idea. Right? So the middle ways idea of these two extremes is that, and this is this whole idea of, Angela was talking about, of, you know, ultimate reality and things not existing. Eternalism, which is basically saying thinking things exist out here in some self-existent way. Eternalism means if something exists, it must exist the way I see it. If something exists, it has to exist the way I see it. Right? So, with the dance thing, you know, I want to know if, like, you know, I can say I had an experience of being a bad dancer this weekend, right? So if it exists, that exists. But I think the way I think it exists is I think it's independent of my projection. I think it's something out there, outside of the way that I'm conceptualizing things. It's inherent in the object itself, right? There's something intrinsic in the dancing that made it bad, right? So I say, well, if it appears that way, that must be how it exists, right? The other extreme, nihilism, if it doesn't exist the way I see it, then it must not exist at all. So this is what you were kind of edging towards before, because you said, well, the past is just a construction, you know, then it means it doesn't exist at all and it's not real. Like, that's the other extreme. And we're constantly on one extreme or the other, right? So, okay. So let's talk about mind only. Mind only has their own way to solve this problem. So this is how, don't die. This is how mind only solve this problem, is the whole idea of the three attributes, right? They say eternalism is thinking that kuntaks, or your constructs, exist by definition, right? You make this mistake when you think your ideas about something exist in the object, right? This is kind of what we were saying before. Good dancer exists in the event of dance, inherently, right? The other extreme is nihilism, is thinking that there's nothing out there at all. Like, oh, well, if I'm projecting a construct onto it, there must be nothing there at all. So you see how this is different than prasangika, right? Prasangika does say there's nothing out there at all independent of your labeling on a basis, right? Mind only says, no, you're going too far. If you take away the construct, there's still something out there, right? So their whole conception of the two cliffs is to get at this idea is, well, it's true that the ideas you apply to things are not inherent in the objects themselves. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing out there at all. That would be another extreme. See how that, I mean, that makes a lot more intuitive sense to us. I mean, I think this is how we experience reality. Like, nobody really thinks, I mean, unless you're a rabid fan, people don't usually think that sports teams are just good and bad in and of themselves. You know what I mean? Like, everybody gets, well, like, yeah, you like your sports team, and this is what they're good at, and, you know, everybody gets that this stuff is preferential. Or like music is a better example. Maybe some people are really convinced like one genre of music is just awesome and other genres are bad. But I think most people get like, well, it depends on your taste, right? But everybody still thinks, well, there are musical notes or sound waves that are happening out there somewhere, right? Your preferences might be self-constructed, but there's music that's happening, right? Whether you were there to hear it or not, or like it or not, right? So you see, this is why this is a good stepping stone, because it uses it uses this idea that we can understand that preferences are kind of somehow within us as like a counter lever to wedge this idea of emptiness, right? Mm-hmm.
So I really understand the mind-only version. The
Mm-hmm.
Prasangika version isn't resonating with me as much. Because what do you mean there's nothing out there aside from, how is it different really from mind-only? I'm not getting it enough.
No, I got you. One way you can say, this is using mind-only language, right? And this is not how Prasangika would describe it, but one thing you could say, one big difference is mind-only would say, you can take away the construct, and there's still going to be something there. Just strip away your ideas about the thing, and your conceptualization and everything else, there's going to be something present, right? Prasangika is going to say, as soon as you strip away the constructs entirely, you're going to be left with nothing. There's no thing that you can talk about independently of the constructs to which you're applying those things. So,
Everything's a construct.
no, not everything is a construct, but everything, you can't talk about things independent of constructs. I mean, I know, there's huge ramifications for that.
If you say there's nothing but construct, then I get it more than
Well, then that's nihilism.
crap.
Because this is why the two cliffs are so hard. Yeah, that's easy, But then you go to this weird place of it's all in your mind, and, it's everything is just your mind, And then that's why you get these kind of, and that turns into a very amoralistic view of emptiness, because you're like, well, I will just decide then that stealing is the best thing for everybody, and then I will do that all the time, right? Did you have a question? No.
Several.
Okay. I wanted to say interesting. This is just a fun story. I wanted to say something about questions because I'm just excited about it. So, I talk a lot about Berzin. So I listened to a bunch of his classes, and I wrote him this email, and I was like asking him all this stuff, and I was like, I know you're super busy and yada yada yada, and but I'd love it if you took time to answer my question. If not, I totally understand. Thank you for even reading. And then so I didn't hear back for a month, and I was like, okay, I totally get it, And then randomly, so I download, I always listen to his audio, and I find an audio, and I download it. I'm like, oh, it's from June 3rd. That's kind of cool. It's recent, right? And he says, first thing, I got this great email from somebody asking me this question about yada, 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 yada. And he did the whole class on the question I had asked, which was amazing. So just to say, and I think this also shifted because things I was very keen to get back to people very quick, after that whole thing. So just to say, always ask questions, even if you think that people don't have time, because it's you never know. And I got to listen to what he said 20 million times because I don't get it at all. But it's super exciting. Oh God, the question was. The question was, in the Gaelic Prasankhika school, you can see common sense objects non-conceptually. Like, they say that for me to see an orange, like other schools, other Tibetan schools say, well, there's only shapes and colors out there, and when you see an orange, you're conceptualizing, and you're grouping all those shapes and colors, and then you throw on an orange. So they say that the orange is only imputed from your mind. Jason Kappa was revolutionary because he said, no, that's not a conceptual process. You actually do that. You see that non-conceptually. And my question then was, well, if that's true, what's all this thing about if, if things only exist by your names and concepts, what's this whole idea of something existing as an orange non-conceptually? That seems like it's not empty then. If things are oranges independent of my conceptualizing them as an orange, then it seems like, well, they're not empty, because emptiness is defined by things don't exist in any other way besides being imputations on groups of parts, right? And he went into this thing about how, well, actually, yes, you see common sense objects non-conceptually, but that doesn't establish their existence, and it's a whole, I'll send you the audio if you want to listen to the class. But it's pretty involved. Huh? It's pretty down the rabbit hole, yeah. But when I figure it out, I'll. Sure.
If emptiness is not having the imputations on those groups of parts, the parts still exist.
The parts are also imputations on groups of parts.
Oh, okay.
And so on down the rabbit hole. Yeah. But there's never just parts and never just imputation. Yeah. It's always imputation and parts. Yeah. Okay. So let's see where we are. Let's go a little more for a break. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. So between mind only and middle way, right? What do you think mind only accuse? I kind of said, but let's try to reconstruct. What does mind only accuse middle way of being on these two extremes? If there's an extreme between eternalism and nihilism, right? Mind only takes issue with middle way. What do you think they say about middle way? Nihilistic. Very good. I say they're nihilistic because they're saying, well, you take away constructs, you think nothing's out there. So you're way off the deep end, right? You're on the side of nihilism. So, now this is why do they think that? Well, they say, look, if you're going to project, right? Mind only says if you're going to project onto something, there has to be something out there for you to project onto, right? If there's no basis besides your projections, then there can't be projections either. So you're just saying nothing exists at all. They're saying it's completely absurd, right? They're saying there must, if you're doing a projection onto something, there must be something out there that you're projecting onto, right? So what do you, on my middle wayers, what do you think, what is the retort, why is that a misconception of the middle way? Gabriella. No, I'm just joking.
These things do exist out there, but they exist as potential. They exist as something that we, if I want to say project a construct on, but there's matter there. There's something there that we input our interpretation of.
But is there a basis before the projection? Can you talk about there being a basis of projection before there's actually a projection?
If you don't, then you have to say that
Well, do you have to say that just to say, I don't think you have to go as far to say that it comes from the same karmic seed. Just look at it linguistically. If we call something a basis of projection, can you talk about something being a basis of projection before there is a projection?
No.
Right, because what does basis of projection imply?
You perceived it,
Say again?
that you perceived it.
Well, even more simply, what does basis of projection imply? This what? Right. If you're talking about basis of projection, then there must already be a projection present, right? It's impossible to talk about a basis of projection outside of the context of projection.
Or projector.
Yeah, or projector, but more specifically, this is interdependence of projection in the basis, just to really hone it down. This is the same thing about Prasangika says about cause and effect, right? You can't talk about cause without implying effect. You can't talk about effect without implying cause. This is not the normal way we think of it, right? We think the cause happens first, and it has some latent inherent ability to cause an effect, and then the effect comes later. But the idea of the emptiness of cause and effect is this idea that you can't, as soon as you've talked about cause, the effect is already implied.
You can't talk about hot without cold.
Yeah, that's a little different, I think, because something can be hot without cold being present. I mean, maybe conceptually.
You have to have a basis of comparison.
You need a basis of comparison, but this is even, I think, a higher degree of interdependence, because when we really talk about interdependence, we're saying one can't be there without the other. So I think if you talked about hotness as it depends on what you mean. How we define hotness, you need to have cold as a basis of comparison, but the feeling of hotness can be there without the feeling of cold, right? But you're right. It's like, how can you talk about hotness without a coldness to compare it to? This is the same idea of this is also another reason why we suffer, right? It's because we want things to be good all the time. It's like, well, there's no such thing as good without the sucky parts, right? You need some type of relief from bad in order to feel good. Like, how can you have a spike without the lows? You know what I mean? If happiness is a spike, you need the lows to define them, right? So, Prasangika says, you're confused. The basis can't come before the projection anyway. So this is a false retort. Yeah?
Then so we're working towards not suffering, but how can we, if you're always going to need that balance of highs and lows, then how will we ever get there?
Because suffering has nothing to do with feeling good or feeling bad.
That's true. I'll have a rebuttal on a second.
Well, tell me when you... I've been working on that one for a while. So this is interesting. So they say that the basis doesn't exist ultimately, then there's no basis for projection and no projection. So this is what kind of Peter was pointing to, but you can see where this is why mind only needs this idea that both the perceiver and the perceived need to come from the same karmic object, right? Because if they didn't, if you're going to say that you need to have a basis of projection and then also a projector, right? If they didn't come from the same karmic seed, they'd almost be completely unrelated. Well, is that true? It's almost a way of saying it puts the power back in karma in a certain way. Because if things could arise out there and they are things independent of your projection on them, well, this is kind of a sidebar. But the problem is, I think, that they're going to say that you can't just project anything onto anything, right? I mean, they're going to say there needs to be a basis of projection first, and then you throw something on it, right? If the object out there didn't come from the same karmic seed, if it just came willy-nilly into your world, you know what I mean? It's like Well, you might have karma to see something, but it's like, I have a karma for an angel, but a bus is coming and it's going to hit me, right? It's like, what karma doesn't really do much for you at that point. You know, things are out there in specific ways. Karma just kind of becomes not very powerful because, you know, you might have a karma for something, but all these other objects are flying at you from other sources. Does that kind of make sense? So these things are distinct, right, in this school. There is a thing out there and there's a projection. And to talk about them lining up in some way, you really need to say that they come from the same karmic seed. I think this is kind of Peter was pointing to before, is that this is the importance of saying that they're from the same karmic seed. Else, how do you get the basis of projection and the projection itself to line up if they don't have a similar cause, right? Like, how could I get, if a bus is coming at me at, 100 miles an hour, how do I get, and I happen to have an unrelated karma for an angel, I mean, how could I possibly get those things to sync up? It doesn't make any sense. Is it, yeah, question?
Can you explain two?
Mm-hmm.
First one, can you explain how, unrelated to this teaching specifically, how like karmic seeds and like different karma coming from the same seed, like how does that work? Is there like
Different karma coming from the same
or
seed?
no, like just
Mm-hmm.
just that concept of like the same karmic seed.
Right. So you can think of it like this. This is in this school, right? In this school, they have this. This is mind only. They have this idea of alaya vijnana, right? This foundation consciousness. And this is really important because this is what they say actually is inherently existent. There is this thing, foundation consciousness, right? Your realities, you can think of it as two sides of this foundation consciousness. It's perceiving itself, in essence. So, I mean, that's by analogy, but they say you have this bok choc, this seed that's in this huge storehouse, right? And when it ripens, it flowers both into the thing you're perceiving and the perceiver. And your ignorance is to think that those are from separate causes. So you think buses come at you from, somewhere else. And you think like you just collide into stuff. You think you just, you collide into buses, you collide into people you like, you collide into people you don't like, and it's just kind of willy-nilly. But what they're saying you don't understand is that no, everything you encounter is coming from these seeds, which are also creating your perception of them. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so it never. I mean, because I get things coming from karma, but how do I know if it comes from the same seed or not? Like, if different things come from the same seed, but I just don't recognize it.
Well, they don't, because that's what it's the lower school. But this is let me transition into the middle way thing because this is what's important. See, middle way accomplishes the same idea as everything coming from karma, and that because your perception of everything and the thing itself are completely interconnected, right? So again, mind only accomplishes this by saying, yeah, they're definitively different things and they're not immediately interdependent. Like the shenwang, the changing thing is an independent entity from your constructs that you're putting on it. The reason that they are related, though, is they're coming from the same karmic seed, right? And this is how they, it's a stepping stone. It's really helpful when you think about mind only as a stepping stone school, right? So they're saying, no, but the reason in karma is important is because it's causing both. See, and it's a good stepping stone from middle way because from middle way too, karma is the most important causal factor. But they accomplish the same idea as everything. Your experience is most importantly dictated by karma, but that doesn't mean that everything has to come from your karmic seeds. It's just that the ripening, your experience of the thing and the object of itself are completely interconnected and they can't be teased out. So essentially karma is shaping your reality, even if the basis of imputation is not technically caused by the karmic seed itself. So this is why this idea of the karmic seed causing both is kind of true by analogy. It's experientially true. Actually, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says it a great way. He says mind only in this sense is cognitively true, but not substantively true. So it's true that your experience is coming from your karma. cognitive, right? But that doesn't mean that karma is actually creating the substance of everything that you experience. Like, and I mean substance like the stuff, like they describe in the mind-only school. So it's just kind of, when you see mind-only as like, it's another wedge to get you closer to this idea of, emptiness, it's really helpful. And then you can see all these kind of, I think, seemingly unconnected ideas. But when you see how they work together, it's really a great ladder up to the kind of next rung. Yeah? Did that kind of answer? Somewhat? A little bit? Not at all.
That's okay.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, should we take a 5-minute break? Is this a good time, or do you want to wait a little bit more? Okay, 5-minute break.
Okay, wait.
Okay. This idea of mind only again is that in mind only you need to talk about, thank you, you have constructs, right? You have ideas for things. Then you have stuff out there. There's pens, there's cars, there's all types of things flying through the world, right? If it were the case that your constructs and the stuff out there did not come from the same mental seed, there would be no way for the ideas in your head to match up with what was going out in the world, right? Like, the only way that I can see an elephant in mind only is because I have the idea of an elephant at the same time that my mind is also producing the basis of an elephant, right? But if if my construct for an elephant is being caused by something completely different than what's happening out there, I might have an idea for an elephant, but then, a bee flies through, right? They'll never match up. Because again, in this school, there's something out there that's real, that is suggestible as an elephant or a bee or whatever else, right? So I'm just trying to explain how this is important. It's important in this school to make sense of it, but it's also, this idea of the same karmic seed is not technically correct, but very important for understanding my middle way. Why? Because essentially, when you get into the idea of everything is independent with your projections, that there's nothing isolated between the two, then in effect, karma becomes the most important thing in your experience. Right? Because as your karma changes, so does the world as an experienced subjective thing, which is the only world you have access to, as Lama Root likes to keep saying. Yeah, does it kind of make sense a little bit? Yeah? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Okay. So we already talked about this a little bit, but mind only says, come on, there needs to be a thing that you're projecting on, and then you project. They're two different things, right? Middle way says, no, basis of imputation arises with the imputation itself, right? So this is where this retort that middle way is coming up with can really be talked about in terms of the two truths, right? So first truth. It's not that things don't exist at all. They just exist nominally. This is the truth of deceptive reality. It's not that things don't exist at all. They just exist nominally. So when you say that things exist nominally, this is the whole idea, naming. This is the whole idea that you can't have a basis of imputation without an imputation already happening. This is the nominal existence of things. Talking about one implies the other. Things exist nominally. By naming it, so it is.
That's by construct.
Well, you're using mind-only language, but yeah, you could say it by construct. right? Things, I mean, I think there's some technical differences, but for our purposes, yeah. It doesn't exist independent of a construct. Yeah?
That's middle way.
This is middle way, right? So this is important for the idea of suffering because I'll go back to what we were saying before last week is like, look, in every other school, there's some crap you got to put up with. You know? There's some, you know, it's like, in mind only, you know, carrot. Yes, the goodness or the badness of the carrot is coming from me, and you know, all these things I say about the carrot are coming from me. But essentially, there's something out here I have to deal with, you know, that I can see in different ways, but I'm limited, right? I can't call this stick of bliss, right? Because that's like, it just has no ability to suggest that. It's constrained to a certain amount, right? As soon as you get at this idea that everything's nominal, then, you know, as the one way to think about it is this: the more you get interdependent with this idea of subject and object, the more becomes possible. You can talk about every school in this way. Every school is trying to strip out, progressively as you go through the schools, just trying to strip out something being left over between this relationship between subject and object. Like every other school is saying, when you take away the subjective, there's something objective left. You know, Vaibhashika is saying, you take away the subjective, it's exactly there, objectively the same, except there's a little bit of ignorance you have about causes, right? So Trantika is saying, well, there's certain perceptual things that you do that are not inherent in the objects. Mind only goes farther and says, well, there's something out there, but when you strip away the subjective, there's no qualities in the object like you think there is. You know, then Svatantrika gets a little bit more and said, well, you strip away the subjective and there's only parts out there, right? That you can imagine you take away the subjective and there's still something out there, but it's not even a whole object, it's just these parts, right? Then you get to Prasangika, you strip away the subjective and nothing is left. So it's trying to just get you, it's trying to, you can see it this way, just progressively put the power more and more and more in your hands. Because there's less and less and less that is outside of this relationship with your subjective mind. Right? And we got to be careful. This is a thing, I mean, this is a whole like teeter-totter between nihilism and eternalism itself, but you know, what does that mean? The whole thing of interdependence between subjective and objective is delicate. It doesn't mean that everything is just your mind, right? Then all of a sudden you're getting to nihilism. This is why the stages are necessary. You can tell people very quickly, well, like, it's all interdependent with your mind, and then, you know, I at least go to this extreme of like, well, it's all in my head, you know? And that's not what we're saying. We're saying we're saying that they're like this, and if you take away the subjective, you can't talk about it outside of the contents of subjective. But that doesn't mean that this part isn't here at all, right? Okay, so then that gets us to the second truth. So deceptive or conventional truth, it's not that things don't exist at all, it's just that they only exist nominally, right? The other side, ultimate truth, is nothing exists ultimately, but ultimate reality, oh, I kind of, I said this wrong. Nothing exists ultimately, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist at all. Right? Nothing exists. What would ultimately be? Ultimately would be independent of any construct or projection. Take away the subjective entirely, and that's what exists ultimately. Nothing exists like that. But then you go to nihilism if you say, well, they don't exist at all and they're all in my head. Right? You're pondering deeply.
So,
Okay.
I have to ask.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is, I mean, look, this is the whole game. You get this, you know, this is the only thing you could study for the rest of your life. I think everything, you know, one way, you can always, all the Buddhist teachings interrelate with each other. So you could say every teaching is related to every teaching. But, I mean, really everything we're doing is to figure out how to tote these two lines, right? Understanding that things exist nominally, and understanding that they don't exist ultimately, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist at all, right? So, you know, well, an example of my weekend in this whole good dancer thing, you know, one extreme would be to say, well, that's just what I am. I'm either a good dancer or a bad dancer, independent of how I'm seeing it, and that's just the way it is. Again, this is the hard thing to get behind because it's actually, it's not being a good or bad dancer that's my suffering, it's the conviction that it's inherent in the thing itself. That's what makes me suffer, right? So we go to this, so we get behind that fact and we're like, oh, I'm not inherently a good or bad dancer. Well, then that must mean that there's no such thing at all being a good or bad dancer. And, you know, I can, you know, I can dance however I want and call it whatever I want, you know, and then I can go rob and call it giving, and then I can go, you know, kill people and call it love, you know. And then that's the other extreme. Just because it's not ultimately those things doesn't mean that those things don't exist at all, right? So this, you know, you can see what this is pointing to over and over is like you don't need to change anything to be happy, you know. It exists the way it exists. It doesn't ultimately exist this way. And actually the only reason that you suffer is because you think it ultimately exists the way it appears. I mean, that's a huge insult. This is the whole thing about concocting we were talking before. You know, you're not upset because of your family. You're not upset because you were disappointed about something. You're not upset about all these things that we actually think we're upset about. Fundamentally, what we're upset about is that we think that those things are somehow ultimately true. And I don't know how to get out this other than like I've had glimmers of it of experience, because when you have a glimmer of the experience of it, it's just this feeling of that's just the way it is. And it's nothing more than that. It's just a phenomenon. It's just that. As soon as we go and concretize it, somehow we suffer about it. But when it's just an experience, it's just an experience. And then that's all that there's no extra thing on it. And then it's like there's no reason to be upset about it, right? And this is again why, you know, it's all training to just habituate yourself to that experience. You know, it doesn't even have to feel good in the moment, I think, to try to think like that. I think it's a wrong idea and actually a little bit cruel to think, you know, well, if I could really just understand the emptiness of it, then you know, in that moment, I could just stop suffering. I mean, it is true. If you really understood the emptiness of something, you wouldn't suffer. But the understanding it intellectually in the moment of that experience is just to start to build the habit where it's actually just going to feel just like an experience. And it'll just appear to you completely different than the thing that you're upset about. But it's a practice up until that point. You know what I mean? The practice is in the pain. You know? I mean, at least for me, I get so caught up in like, well, I'm not doing it right because it still sucks and I'm thinking about emptiness. It's like, that's not the point. That's where you practice it. You practice the idea, you build the seeds, you build the habit, and then it'll happen like that, where it's just, this is what it is. It's a thing, it's a phenomenon, right? And that would be nice. Right? I mean, it's such a relief, right? You don't have to do all this stuff to like not suffer. You just, you know what I mean? It's just, it's a hair's breadth away.
It's
sounds to me like muscle memory in
Yeah,
sports, where it's
totally.
like you practice something and then when it happens, it just happens naturally. You don't even
Yeah,
think about it.
totally. Like in sports, they have this whole idea between conscious competence and unconscious competence, which is like conscious competence is when you do something because you're really thinking about it, right? Like tennis, like, you know, my grip is like this, my grip is like this, my grip is like this. Unconscious competence, all of a sudden, it's just experience. It just happens. It's not, you don't have to think about it. And I think you can think about it in the same way. Like when you're in the midst of pain, the idea is not that you think about it the right way and you're going to feel better. It just doesn't work like that. Well, all you're doing is you're building the muscle, like Brandon's saying, so that one time it'll just happen. And like you were saying, Lori, like you just notice a little bit less and less.
But that
Right?
doesn't mean that it's not possible to think about it a certain way and then, is it? And then feel a different way because.
You know, I'd say in some way it's not. I mean, if it does happen that way, then you had the karma for it, and that's come from past experiences. But they keep saying, like, you can't affect the present in the present.
Yeah.
You know? If you have the karma to suffer, that's how it's going to happen. All you can really do in that moment is you can build the memory, you know, the muscle memory, like Brandon's saying, so that down the road you have a different automatic response. But until then, it's going to feel like, I love you so much. Right? And then that's the work, you know? The work is not in feeling good all the time. It's just not. Actually, I think the work is in feeling pretty bad. Because that's the only arena in which you can play these things out. You know what I mean? That's the only way you're going to do. I mean, you know, they talk about ACI 6, like the diamond cutter course, and it's this huge meditation on emptiness. And what do they say? They don't say, you're going to get happy really quick. They say, no, you're going to have a lot of stuff come up because it's a purification. What does that mean? You got to work through it in order to get to the other side of it. You know, it's not, I don't know. I think I've just been thinking about this a lot, and I think we so often think when we hit struggle that our practice is not going well. And it's actually, you know, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. You know, I think it's sometimes helpful to talk about God in this way. It's like, oh, you got some tools under your bed. Okay, now we can actually start dealing with those things you've been keeping kind of under the mattress for a long time. Right? You're ready for it when those things start to happen. Yeah? Okay, so do we dare go into this? Let's skip all that. Yeah. Trying to think what we want to do. Okay, let's talk about this part. This is a little technical, but I want to give you some of the content of the course. Okay, let's talk about external objects. So this gets kind of into the division of the schools. So, external objects. Let's go through this through each of the schools. So, just to throw some names out. Remember, we have detailless, sutrous, mind only, middle way. Right? Middle way is divided into what? Very good. Hey, whatever works. Okay, here's the fun part. Mind only is also divided into two sections. You have mind only who follow. No, sorry, said that wrong. Svatantrika. Okay, back up. Madhyamika divided into two. Svatantrika, the independence. Consequence, prasangika. Okay. Lower half of the middle way, Svatantrika, is also divided into two parts. So now you have quarter schools within the middle way, right? Svatantrikas have the Svatantrikas who follow mind only, and the Svatantrikas who follow sutras. In the context of this course, it's really divided about what is their idea about external objects. Okay? So we'll get to that. So detailist, right? Vaibhashika, also known as Abhidharma. Sutras, school number 2. And prasangika, which is the upper half of the middle way, consequent school. They all accept external objects.
Wait, prasangika is the upper half of the middle way?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
The higher. They're the ones. They're the big cheese. They're the big cheese group.
I thought that prasangika was like nothing exists by definition. I guess I
The
don't know.
highest understanding.
Highest understanding.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Who says that they don't? So let's get to the detailists. Sorry, let's first get to the detailists and the sutras. The detailists and the sutras, they believe that there's these things, when they say external objects, they believe in these things called partless particles. Right? So why is this a problem? Well, why do you need to talk about partless particles? There's this idea that, okay, well, if stuff is inherently made of matter, if there's, this is like, if you read the thing about the Higgs boson, this is entirely around the Higgs boson. If there's matter out there, if groupings, well, it's what is physical stuff made of, right? What is the ultimate building block of physical matter? You can't say like a cup is the ultimate building block of physical matter because everything would have to be made of cups, right? It's like, and this makes sense from our kind of atomistic point of view in Western science, but there's got to be like a fundamental thing that all things are made of, like the basic building blocks that we group together and make objects out of, right? It has to be partless because if it has a part, well, then we can just reduce it further. So in their conception, there must be this partless particle, this fundamental building block, the thing that, and this is a paradox, they say it has no width or height. Because if it had width, then there'd be a left part and a right part, right? And they say, well, then that would be the, and then, right? So they're saying, well, there has to be some fundamental building block. Else, what do you make stuff from? Like, it's kind of like Zeno's paradox, right? If you keep dividing, you never get to something that you can actually build anything from. So they say, well, there must be a partless particle. There must be some fundamental building block, right? And this is, I mean, you can see, like, this is why it's entertaining, this idea that we spend millions, well, not the Europeans at least, spend millions of dollars at CERN to create, colliders, and, to find the, they're trying to constantly split things open and find the fundamental building block, right? And then it gets really far out because then they find one thing and they find that, well, it actually, from one thing comes two things that are equally, and it's a whole, it gets weird down there. So partless particles. So they say this is ultimate reality. This makes sense to us intuitively, right? Like there's some, like, yes, I see a grouping of atoms in one way, and things grouped together to form objects, but essentially it's really made of atoms. Like my professor Dennett, Daniel Dennett at Tufts, this is the scientific worldview. He'd explain it like this: like everything essentially can be described or reduced to interactions of atoms. Biology is convenient because it describes things on a higher level, but that higher level essentially reduces to interactions of molecules. He would say consciousness is the same. We can talk about consciousness and you feel this and I feel that and I saw that, but really we could reduce it down to, sight is just a very complicated interaction of atoms. Consciousness is just a very, very complex interaction of atoms, right? And this is what this school is thinking. Ultimately, that's all that's real. And then we have these different levels and more complicated levels of description. This is the Detailists and the Sutras. So the first two, the Hinayana, you could say, the Hinayana school is on that chart. But then on Prasangika, obviously, we don't talk about a fundamental base and a fundamental projector, right? These things are all, so it depends on what level you are, right? One level is not more real than the other. It's just basis and projection. But you're not going to find a fundamental level that it can all reduce to, because you'll just go infinitely, right? Okay, mind only. So this is a little complicated. So they reject partless particles, partly because they say, well, things are coming from karmic seeds ultimately, right? There's no. Now again, they don't say that everything is just mind. We need to be careful, right? They're not saying everything is just in your head. There are things out there. However, what they're coming from is a karmic seed. You think it's coming from something physical, and it's really coming from a karmic seed, right? Likewise, they don't deny that things are made of particles, but that, again, is just, it's not their ultimate reality, right? Ultimately, it's coming from a seed. Maybe that manifests as particles. You know, that's the basis. But they don't say that everything, there's a difference between saying that things have particles and everything reduces to particles. See what I mean? So ultimately, they would say, well, everything reduces to a karmic seed. That's what it came from. Is this making sense? Yeah? Okay.
And a karmic seed can't be different.
You know, that's an interesting thing. They're going to say a karmic seed is something, I don't know, it's weird. It's like, it's different stuff. This is why they propose a whole other consciousness. You know, in mind only, in other Buddhist schools, there's 6 consciousnesses. And mind only, there's 8. One, I think, for apperception, that might be wrong. And then this other one, this foundation consciousness, because they think there's this thing, there's this actual thing that has the karmic seeds. And it's ripening into perceived things and objects. But it's almost like...
So it's only one tier down? It's a thing that has the karmic seeds?
What do you mean you say tier down?
Like, if you think about things breaking down.
It's not a tier down. You can almost, I mean, this is my guess, but it's almost like you have a karmic seed, and then it manifests as this object and this thing. And you can, if you want to talk about the physical object, it can break down into parts.
Oh.
You see what I mean? But that's not its basis. That's not like its fundamental foundation. The fundamental foundation is the karmic seed.
Yeah.
But you see in Vaibhashika, take all that away, they're going to say, no, it's all parts. It all comes from parts, and then it coalesces into physical form.
So the karmic, wait, is that the same thing where the karmic seed has nothing to do with it, and it's just about the parts of the thing?
Yeah, in Vaibhashika, your karmic seeds are not it's only one, your karmic seed is only a mental factor.
So it's not a part of the...
No, it's not a part of the cause of the physical object.
The karmic seed is only like your perception of the object.
Yeah, this is like, well, and it's limited. This is the 5 niyamas we talked about earlier. Like, they say that there's biology, there's environmental cause, there's physical laws, biology, environment, physical cause, then one I'm missing, and then karma. So karma really only has control on that. I think it only has control over like your happiness or your sadness. You know, it's a big deal. It's a big deal, but it's not like, you know, the whole seeing angels and all that. I mean, forget it. You can just be happy with your, you know, yelling mother, but she's still going to be a yelling mother, right? Okay, so mind only, blah, 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 not ultimate. Okay, so now we go on to Svatantrika. Svatantrika. First, you have those who follow sutras. They follow sutras, so they believe in partless particles. Right? But they don't say that there's these small infinite particles that have no width or no height or anything like that. They just say, well, their widths and heights are just so small that they're no longer identifiable. And this makes sense on this school because I'll give you a kind of brief on Svatantrika. They say reality is coming from 50% two things. There's something suggesting like balloon, 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 and then you go, ah, balloon, right? It's coming from two things. So what they're saying, and all reality is like that. So you get down to a partless particle when you can't identify anything smaller than that. That's all it means. That's what makes the smallest particle. And everything does come from that. But in terms of physical sense, but it's not completely independent of your being able to identify the partless particle. Do you have a question? Who's you?
Who is the you that's identifying you can't get any smaller?
Mm.
Is that a subjective thing then of partless particles? So Peter's partless particle will be different than others because Peter can't see as well.
You know, in middle way in general, and this is interesting, and if you look at Chandrakirti's stuff, valid cognition is not established just by an individual subjective person. It's part of valid cognition is does it agree with the group? And this makes sense. It's not like it's ultimately like that, but that's just what we mean by valid. So like, you know, they have the classic example in the Tibetan literature is they say because of jaundice you see a blue mountain as yellow or something, right? So they would say that might be your experience, but that doesn't make it valid because it's contradicted by another person's valid cognition of the mountain. So my guess is they would say, following Chandrakirti, that just because you as an individual see it differently, that doesn't validate it. There is a larger context in whether other beings also see it that same way. So this is where you get into the idea of science. You know, there is such thing as a scientific community that establishes what is the smallest particle. For the moment, yeah.
If you look at it that way, you could just as well say that just because you see it that way doesn't invalidate it just based on how many other people see it that way.
I mean, you could, but I guess that's just not what we mean by valid. I mean, I think we all have I don't think they're saying that's ultimately what makes something valid. I think they just say that is what we mean when we say valid, you know, because it's like we don't live like that, you know, like if we see a ghost and we don't just say like, oh, I saw a ghost. We go like, wait, did you see that? You know, we validate it in context with other people. That's what we do, you know. So I think he's just kind of saying that's what it means for something to be a valid cognition.
But then this ultimate particle,
Mm-hmm.
is that also coming from itself and from our projections, or is that independent of
I mean, it's complicated. It's nuanced in the school. It's 50-50. They say that there's...
even the ultimate particle is still?
That's my understanding of it. Like, they say nothing exists independent of projection and basis, but yet there is a defining characteristic on the part of the basis that's independent of the projection that allows it to be validly projected as what it is. So, you know, I guess there is a particle out there that has certain definitive characteristics which validly allows you to label it as the partless particle. But the difference is that they're going to say, well, their beef with Prasangika is going to say, well, if it was just labeling, you could label anything as anything and you'd be right. And they're saying there has to be something that's suggesting itself to you, label it like that. But then they say weirdly, but it only comes into existence once you actually label it. So that's, I mean, I think that's essentially the problem with this school is what you're pointing to. Yeah. Okay. So then you have obviously the Svatantrika who follow mind only. And their position is just the same as the mind only school, which is basically that I mean, just like we said before, both the thing that you're looking at and you're looking at it is coming from the same karmic seed. So they avoid this whole idea of partless particles altogether. I think they would just say a little bit more strongly is that, well, the thing you're projecting onto doesn't exist by definition. This whole discussion we had about by definition, your perception of it in the thing, what's really out there is still just parts. There are parts out there, and then you're constructing that into a thing. However, those parts are not coming from partless particles, they're coming from a previous karmic seed. Yeah? Okay, Prasangika. Prasangika says, very simple about what external things is. External things are. External things are just things that you perceive as being outside of yourself. So it's like, if I do this and I don't feel it, it's external. Right? I mean, this is interesting because I think maybe you can see what the catch out of this is just in how Prasangika articulates it, because every other school is trying to say, well, there's something on the side of the object that makes it external somehow. And again, Prasangika is pointing to this idea that, well, even what's external and what's internal is just conventional, right? It's just how you construct it. How we construct external things in our world is it's like, well, it's not me. So this is internal, and this is external. But again, you can see this is like, gives rise to this whole possibility of Master Shantideva. He goes into, it's funny actually, because Geshe-la goes into this whole discussion about this and says, well, if you poke the cup and you don't feel it, then it's external, right? But do you guys remember what is Shantideva? He goes into this whole discussion of, well, how can I feel other beings as me if I don't feel their pain? And he says, that's still just a matter of habit. There's no inherent reason why something has to be separate from you just because you don't feel it.
Mother and a baby.
Yeah, mother and a baby. Or you and your iPhone, for that matter. I mean, at least me and my iPhone, right? We do it with stuff all the time. Or he goes to the other extreme and he says, well, if you want to take that logic, then why should your hand care about the pain in your foot? I mean, you could be completely fragmented, and you could say, well, I'm feeling that I feel these are separate entities, but I feel the pain of both. Right?
That doesn't, like, if you take your phone, or, I don't know, that's like speaking, okay, when you're saying, like, I touch this cup and I don't feel it, so it's external, that's very, like, literal. If you're talking about a mother and their baby, regardless, if someone hurts the baby, the mother isn't going to feel it.
Right, but that's true, but the fact that that's the criteria used, the fact that that's the criteria to define the difference between internal and external is arbitrary.
Listen, I'm speaking as a mother, definitely feel their pain. I shudder when they hit themselves. I shudder. I mean, literally, I can feel it.
I mean, yeah, and that's also, I mean, and then you get the idea of, omniscience and all this other stuff, and you can, actually feel other people. But I think the idea is there's no inherent reason that should be the delineation between internal and external.
That's what makes it,
Right? Because, again, you could equally say, well, I happen to feel the pain of two different objects, but they're unrelated. Right? That would be equally valid. I feel the pain in my hand, and I feel the pain in my foot. But one's external, one's internal. So, trying to think how to apply this idea of external objects, but why does this, what does partless particles have to do with your, kind of daily life? I had this, I'll go at this indirectly. I did philosophy in undergrad, and we were doing this whole thing about free will versus determinism. Does everybody kind of know that argument? Like, some people say, well, if everything's determined, there's not much, my actions don't matter because it's going to play out one way or the other, no matter, I mean, that's kind of fatalism. But It's more like whatever I'm going to decide is already kind of predestined. So there's no such thing as choice. Whatever I'm going to do, I might have the illusion that I chose, but really I could have never done anything different, because every cause is going to yield some very specific effect. Free will says, on the other hand, well, there's this possibility to intervene in the whole chain of cause and effect and, intercede somehow and change the outcome of things by sheer will. And you could have done something different, and you did the right thing or you did the wrong thing. You really had an option. And I was kind of like, well, this is all interesting, but why does this, who really cares? We're still, nobody's going to do that and do one thing or the other and behave much differently necessarily. Why does it matter? And my professor was explaining, well, it's really interesting. Like, if you look at Democrats and Republicans, you actually see the underpinnings of both of these worldviews. Democrats are much more deterministic. They talk about, look, we need to give people other chances because they're a product of their society. Somebody might have stolen, but they came from a very desperate situation. This is why they talk about things like, insanity pleas and stuff like that. They're much more willing to say there's a lot of places where your agency is compromised due to factors outside of your control, and you're being determined by something else, right? Republicans, on the other hand, go to the other extreme, and they say, look, it's all free will. So bad, there's plenty of people who are in equally bad situation, and they made a better choice. So you need to be held responsible for your choices regardless of your context. And there's not much, mitigating circumstances doesn't play as big of a picture in their ethics, right? This is kind of like, everybody has equal opportunity. You make your choices and you deal with the consequences of it. So just to say, in this whole idea, and I think we all have to, my teacher always says, draw the line. But again, this is where you take on faith. Everything we talk about in Buddhism is directly related to you freeing yourself from suffering. Again, they say, all teachings in Buddhism are related to the Four Noble Truths, which we don't have to go into, but basically it sums up in getting yourself out of suffering. So partless particles is not just, in talking about external objects, is not just intellectually stimulating. And Buddha had a cool idea and was like, let's figure this out. It's kind of sexy, right? It has a reason. It's either directly or indirectly, they say, related to your suffering. So, where do we, how do you draw that line? I mean, I can say for me that this whole idea of there being, in order to entertain the idea that everything reduces to physical matter, you have to entertain this idea of partless particles, if you really think about it. And I really think that this scientific worldview is why we're so caught up in materialism. I mean, this is the fundamental idea. Belief in partless particles is fundamentally what's behind the idea that stuff will make you happy. And why we're so quick to go on prescription drugs when there's a problem, because we think ultimately it's happening at the atomic level. And if we can just manipulate that stuff, then the rest of it will filter on up into whatever we need, right? So, and it seems a little indirect, but if you really get behind the impossibility of partless particles and how things can't be functioning that way, then your tact becomes completely different. Then you get into this whole idea of causes and conditions. Yeah, you might work out here with some of the stuff, but that's not the foundation of everything. You need to work on your mind, because it doesn't just reduce to particles, right?
Science is, where does that fall into place then? That's like null and void.
No, science is valid. I think it depends on what you mean by science. You see, this is my personal take on it, is that scientific method, completely correct. All scientific method says is you have to, it's a process of validation. You have to test your ideas. And that's Buddhism. I mean, Buddhism doesn't, you don't just believe anything just because somebody said it. You have to test it. You have to validate it. The whole idea that everything reduces to materialism is not inherently scientific.
Well,
Why is that?
Because, I don't know, in science, I mean, elements and it all breaks down into particles, and that's what it is, and you can change different things by fixing others, and it's all very logistic.
Yeah, but that's scientific culture. That's not scientific method.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I
Right.
agree with you on the scientific method thing, but saying that the other stuff besides scientific method isn't science, is that what you're saying?
No, no, the stuff besides the scientific method. No. I'm saying that. I think we just collapse the two often, and
Okay.
I think this is what happens in the debate between religion and science. Is that religion rejects some things about science, and then science says, okay, you're rejecting rationale, and you're rejecting logic, and you're rejecting reason. And I'm saying there's some claims about the culture of science that you can reject on good scientific reason, or good logical reasoned out reason, or using the scientific method. I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was great on this. He said, Western science, how the physical world works, amazing. You are light years beyond Asia. You've got that down to a T. You are completely lost on how the mind works. You know what I mean? Because what did they do? The Buddhist tradition is thousands of years of people exploring their mind from an internal standpoint. I think from the Buddhist perspective, we've been going about it backwards because we're looking at neurons and how physical things are and trying to use that to explain consciousness. And again, we're saying the subjective way of introspection is not valid, because essentially we have this idea that, well, it all reduces to physical stuff. But I don't know where that came in. I mean, I guess Francis Bacon. I mean, but that's an assumption, right? So there's other ways to be scientific about the mind without having to reduce everything to neurobiology, which is meditating. It's a scientific experiment, right? You go in there and you muck around and you experiment, see what works and what doesn't work. Mm-hmm.
But, okay, so with the scientific method, okay, does that always apply to every case in Buddhism? I mean, because, so part of the scientific method would be retesting. So, I don't know, take the direct perception of emptiness. Would you have to experience that twice in order to really confirm that you experienced it? Man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could say in science, well, can you ever prove anything? Because there's always another experiment you could do. I mean, and I think in Buddhism, though, there is something to be said about direct perception. Like, how could I scientifically disprove to you that your name is Angela and that you live where you live and you have a dog and all those things? Like, you've experienced them directly. I could give you, I don't know, I mean, I could give you some type of proof, but that's a direct experience. So I think, there is there is such thing as seeing a direct result. I think both in science and in this in this Eastern viewpoint.
Yeah.
Like once everybody sees a solar eclipse, there's not going to be any more scientific experiments to test if they exist.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's an interesting question. Direct experience is a whole other thing. Let's end there, though, because I know we're 5 minutes over. So take a moment to just sit up tall. And then just bring that intention that you had at the beginning of class. And then even if you don't know how anything tonight connected to what that original intention you had in your mind, just making another intention in your mind, or what we call a dedication, to put your time here tonight towards the fruition of that intention. Even if you don't understand how that could possibly work, just by making the connection in your mind, you create the possibility. And you can slowly open your eyes. Thank you, guys.